protocol, you see certain parameters that are fixed, which reflect, I think, ways to accommodate the media's desire and the public's desire, presumably, to have some of this access that comes with cameras in the courtroom, but at the same time protects against those things that might compromise the integrity of the process. So we're a long way from having cameras in the courtroom, for example, covering criminal trials.
Welcome back to the arena. I'm Michael Corrin. Now, there's a high-profile murder case taking place. There's room for, as you know, I'm sure only 5 members of media, 5 members of the public, or figures like that. Very few. So should cameras be allowed in to give wider access? If I may, where do I stand on this? I'm probably supposed to say yes to one side or no to the other side. I can see both arguments. On the one hand, I don't want the circus of the O.J. Simpson trial. I don't want lawyers parading for the cameras. I don't want voyeurism and prurience and so on. But also justice has to be public. People have to know what is going on. I'm sort of caught in the middle. So I'm going to go to someone who is much wiser than me, political and social commentator J.J. McCulloch, who joins us from Vancouver. What's the answer? Help me.
Well, the answer, I think, when you have a situation like this, where you sort of have 2 sides both making very strong claims, is to actually look at the evidence, which is something that is very rarely done when this debate is unfolding. You know, you have a lot of sort of people within the sort of judicial establishment, you know, the judges and lawyers, and their arguments are always just based on feelings and sort of a vague sense that this or that might happen. You know, it might turn into a spectacle. You know, the witnesses might be intimidated. It might compromise. Well, what was very interesting to me, I was looking into the background of this debate, and I looked at the case of the state of Minnesota, which has been having this debate. The Minnesota Supreme Court commissioned an investigation on this. They looked at all of the surrounding states that border Minnesota that do allow cameras in courtrooms, and then they did a thorough investigation, and they found unanimous support for the idea among judges, among lawyers, among victims' right advocates in all of the border states, all of the states that had it. The entire sort of judicial victim, all of the sort of scene was in favor of it. Then they contrasted that, well, who are making the strongest arguments against it? And it was people within the judicial establishment of the state who had no evidence whatsoever, just feelings. And I feel like we're seeing the exact same thing happening in this country, is you have people, you know, you have judges, you have lawyers, you even have some media commentators who are just sort of having vague feelings and vague suspicions, but they cannot marshal any evidence to prove that their suspicions are borne out by reality.
Okay, but the case here, the Magnata case, I don't want to go into all the details, people know many of them. It's not irrelevant that this is the issue, that this is the particular case that has developed this debate, this conversation. There's nothing here for us to learn. It's all about people wanting to be titillated by the horrific. It's not something which will set a precedent and change the way we understand the law. So it does seem to be voyeurism.
Well, I mean, that's true to a point, but I mean, it will set a precedent if this is sort of, you know, the crack in the door that gets us in there. I mean, if this is what it takes to sort of mobilize public support for this idea, I mean, I'm all for it in that sense, because I think it is very important that justice is not only done, but justice is seen to be done. And that includes, you know, not only sort of the most sort of scurrilous cases like this one, but sort of run-of-the-mill ordinary cases as well. I think that, you know, we can use high-profile cases like this in order to marshal public support. I mean, the last time I saw this debate was in my own province of British Columbia, whereas you may recall that there was a riot some years ago over the Stanley Cup. And this sort of generated so much public outrage over the nature of these terrible property crimes that devastated a city that there was enormous public support, and even the political establishment threw their weight behind the idea that there should be televised courtrooms. I mean, it didn't end up happening because the judges said, no, we're not going to do that because of their vague suspicions, but it was useful in the sense that you have to have a very high-profile case to sort of mobilize and to make people realize what is the public incentive here, what is the public, what good is being done to serve the public need, and that is to see justice being done, particularly to see justice being done among the worst criminals in our midst.
There was a not dissimilar debate that occurred when there was a call to put cameras in Parliament, both in this country and throughout Europe. People said, well, politicians will play to the camera. Well, to a degree they do sometimes. But that wore off pretty quickly, though. They don't even know the cameras are there anymore. They just do what they would otherwise do. Most court cases are incredibly boring. No one would have any interest in them. I suppose the O.J. Simpson case caused problems because it was it the most viewed court case in history? It may have been. And justice wasn't done, it seemed to me. It was antics and it was cliches. And so we got the very opposite of justice. I think it's inevitable. But at the same time, lawyers and judges, who in many ways politically are very liberal, are privately and personally very conservative people.
It's quite funny because in this country we actually allow cameras to show proceedings of the Supreme Court of Canada, which not a lot of people recognize because most Supreme Court proceedings are so boring.
Yes.
They also televise the Supreme Court proceedings in England, but they don't in the United States, which is quite interesting. So they don't televise the Supreme Court in the United States, even though in most states they televise all other courts. And the interesting thing that shows sort of the emptiness of this debate is that in America, you have the judicial complex sort of saying, well, we could never televise, the Supreme Court of the United States because that would cheapen it and turn it into, a gong show and a spectacle and blah, blah, blah. The exact same arguments that you see used in Canada to justify not televising lower courts, but, we do televise the higher courts. So, I mean, it is completely incoherent. Again, it's just these arguments based on suspicions, not actually based on any evidence of demonstrable ill effect to the judicial system, to our ability for justice to get done. And if you ask me, those kind of things, those are the only concerns we should have when we're actually pursuing judicial policy in the greater sense of the public's right to know.
I'm loath to use the word, but there's also a sense of elitism here. Those who work within the judiciary do regard themselves as being rather important. The way they dress, the way they behave. And again, it's quite ironic that they can have very liberal opinions politically, but when it comes to the way they behave and the way they conduct themselves, rather different. So I think it's only a matter of time, and we'll just wait for that to happen. As always, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Michael.